Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. And it's Jared. I've been so excited to come and visit, and I've just loved the conversations that I've been able to have with folks today. And like I've said to some of you, I feel like we've just started scratching the surface. So I do look forward to those conversations continuing. Okay, so I've just learned to use Blackboard Collaborate. So let's see, this is the test. Application window, yes. And hopefully I will now be sharing my screen. Yes. All right. So far, so good. So do please feel free to jump in the chat or aloud. It's just wonderful to kind of stop and go and have a conversation as we're moving through this time. And so my research group at the University of Ottawa has two distinct branches, one through my original training in chemistry, and so it's a chemistry education research thread in our work. And the other one grew out of a chair in university teaching starting in 2016, where we really started looking at student learning and how we might equip and empower students for learning. And so it's especially, given these massive changes that we've all undergone in the last year, talking about one of the specific ways that we might better equip and empower students, both for their studies at university, but also thinking about lifelong learning. And I know based on the conversations that I've already had today, that there's some really great similar kinds of thinking and work that's being done in this area. So for me, it's an opportunity to learn and hear from the work that you're doing, and perhaps you will also learn from some of the stuff that I'm doing. So we originally set out to help students address three problems: managing multiple course life goals and demands, competing expectations, dealing with failure, identifying what to learn and how to learn it with again, so much information coming at us all the time. And we also wanted to see how we might more explicitly address some degree level expectations related to the awareness of limits of knowledge and autonomy and professional capacity skills. And so as we did this, we're also thinking not only that university environment, but also what students would need later on. With the World Economic Forum, just as an example, speaking to the idea of 50% of all employees needing to reskill, retrain in some way by 2025. And so when people are needing to do that, trying to figure out, well, what is it I have to learn? What would be appropriate to learn? What would be useful? How might I be strategic in that way? There's thinking about how we might equip students with the skills, whether it's students who are coming from high school or even coming back from existing careers. And so Alex Trebek, who was an alumnus from the University of Ottawa, actually addressed some of these things quite head on in his in Jeopardy, in the game show. Where participants have to look at the given categories and decide in which ones they're most knowledgeable, and they want to try to work through to get those correct answers. Or in the final Jeopardy round, kind of taking it that step farther and thinking, okay, do I know this question or not? Where am I in the standings right now? How much do I want to bet? How might I work strategically to win? What do I want to do here? And so this speaks to one of the key skills that we try to address in the module. That's that of metacognition. So it's identifying what you know and what you don't know, and then strategizing accordingly. All the things you do to decide what you actually want to learn, what your learning goals are, and how you're going to get there. Turns out that this is something that most of us were university professors or students in grad school or getting higher into undergrad. We become really good at learning. And the thing is, though, that most of us have learned to do it so implicitly that we haven't learned exactly what those skills are that we have. We're not even as aware of the skills that we possess. And so articulating them can be difficult. Making them explicit to students, teaching them to students can be really difficult. In some ways, there's parallels with how we are as experts in a given discipline, in chemical engineering, for example. Sometimes you know your field so well that it's hard to break it down for somebody else. And for me, I realized this as a volunteer. between my undergraduate degree and starting graduate school, I decided that, I know English really well and I love to travel. And so why don't I put those ideas together and I'll be an English teacher in Nepal. And how hard could that be, teaching English as a second language? And so I very naively became a volunteer and had wonderful life experiences. But I learned that there are things that I implicitly knew about the English language that really were not obvious. And there are rules in the English language that I had no idea existed. And so perhaps as an example, if I said a Canadian delightful great snowfall white, and you were a native English speaker, that would strike you as a kind of off. The words are there, maybe you can make sense of it, but that's not the way we would phrase it. And instead in English, we would say a delightful great white Canadian snowfall. And who knew? I certainly didn't know. There are rules in the English language about how this works, and there's a way to make it explicit to somebody who's learning English as a second language. And if any of you have either learning English as a second or additional language, or you're learning other languages, like this can be really hard to figure out all these rules that people just seem to know because they've grown up with it. So same thing then comes back to this idea of metacognition and other related learning skills that we address in the module. Sometimes it's things that we know that we have trouble making explicit. And so our goal then, and I say our because it was a real team that came together to build this module, including students as key project members. So our goal building this growth and goals module was to make something that was systematic, that systematically taught in a very purposeful way these different learning skills. That was scalable, so it could go from a small group all the way to very large groups, multiple institutions, multiple different disciplines, and that taught these learning skills explicitly, with the intent that when students then learn these skills, where had the knowledge and skills, that they could both articulate them and transfer them into new contexts. And so some other things that we really wanted in this module, we wanted it to be integrated in courses and align with the intended learning outcomes in the course, both to meet students where they already were, so we weren't adding new things onto them that were separate from their existing coursework. And we wanted something that integrated already fit with what they were learning. So there was sort of the meaningful component was there as well. At the University of Ottawa and being in a country where English and French are so predominantly spoken, we wanted a module that could address both, that was available in both. We wanted to at least meet, or even better if we could exceed, accessibility requirements. And we wanted this as an open education resource. So the licensing we use is a Creative Commons. The by represents attribution to the group of authors or creators. Non-commercial is that we want this resource to always be free for anybody to use, and share alike. So anybody is welcome to use and adapt it. And we ask that for those who do that, they share it forward in the same way. So when people come to the module, this is what the landing page would initially look like on the website where we hold it on Pressbooks, and then anybody can make a copy and make one of their own, and it can also be downloaded in a number of formats. So in terms of the table of contents, students would come to this, and I'll dive into more of the details, but essentially they work through a series of book chapters, essentially electronic book chapters, unless one chooses to print it, and interspersed with the theory, which is text and videos, are activities pretty much in every chapter or section. And the way this plays out then across a course is that the students would do most of the module very early on in the course, sort of getting the theory before things get too heavy in the course. They're doing this growth and goals part. And then before and after each major assessment, they're doing a piece, and I'll talk about that in more detail in a bit. And then before and after the final assessment in the course. And so in my organic chemistry course, that might be a midterm, but it could also be an assignment, a lab report, an essay, a project. I mean, it really could be any type of assessment or meaningful moment in the course. So one of the initial parts of the modules starts out this idea of self-regulated learning. So that's a process by which students or people take control of their actions, motivations, and feelings in order to seize opportunities and overcome challenges in order to accomplish goals. So we'll talk about how that plays out in the module. the first is a reflect portion, so starting with that reflect stage of self-regulated learning, identifying tendencies or beliefs about learning. And so I'll bring up a list in a second that describes how these students have prepared for their upcoming final exam and their feelings about it. And then the students are asked in an activity if they see any similarities between themselves and these students. So some of the examples, they've not set any study goals. They simply tell themselves to do as well as they can. Not planning out their study time. They cram for a few hours. Feeling very defensive about their study methods, not open to other ways of thinking about learning. Don't ask for help, or are afraid of looking stupid. So after doing an activity, there's typically some feedback or get more information. Sometimes it points them to additional literature on learning for those who are interested in learning more, and then it walks them through to the next piece of the module. So here I'd invite you, if you'd like, to look at some beliefs about learning, and these are 5 of the examples that we list in the module. So if you can go over, for those, of course, totally for those who are willing, but if you are willing, you can go to menti.com and it'll ask you for a code. And so the code that you can type in is 4932875. And let me open up voting. There we go. Okay, so at this point, I think you should be able to answer those. I'm just pausing to see if folks are able to answer that. 49328. All right, so I'm seeing answers coming in here as people are sending them. I will be quiet for a minute while you do that. So wait maybe another 10 seconds or so, and let me see if I can share my screen while we're waiting. Okay, so here's what I'm looking at in the answers. I think, there we go, yep. Okay, so we seem to be agreeing that metacognition can be just as important as intelligence, so identifying what we know, what we don't know, and strategizing accordingly. Disagreeing about a student's failure to learn is limitations in their intelligence. So it's interesting to see in undergraduate courses, students' answers can play out quite differently here. And what we hear from students as they're answering the modules, that they're really curious about what other students in the course are answering, both for this kind of question, but also for some of the later ones we have around study strategies, where they're seeking help, etc. And these bring up some really great discussion pieces in the class. Particularly this one down the 4th one in yellow: the professor is responsible for teaching me and making sure that I learn. For those of you, Chin, for example, who've been involved in survey construction, usually would not put two pieces, 2 different ideas together in a single survey item, because as people answer, you're not really sure if they're answering one or the other. We decided to leave this one together because it led to such rich discussions in class. Whose responsibilities, who's responsible for what in the classroom? Where does one person's responsibility end and the other one begin? I wonder if anybody has any additional thoughts they might want to share, either aloud or through the chat right now, about what you're seeing here. And I'll wait that awkward pause while people either unmute or write things in the chat. Yeah, double barrel survey questions are a problem. Yeah, absolutely. And if we were using this as an instrument for educational research, we wouldn't be able to use this item. Love it for the class part. I saw a hand up. I think you're able to unmute and go ahead. Would you like to do that? Oh, I missed it. Okay. Folks jumping in. Yeah, I'm going to see your question. Interested in how many students are taught about goals before university. So the Ontario curriculum right now has ideas around self-regulated learning. There's a lot of mindfulness ideas, not mindfulness, sorry, mindsets ideas coming through right now. Although what we're still seeing reported by students in courses is that they are, the ideas that we're teaching in the module are brand new for the majority of them, the vast majority, well over 90-95% of them. It's a great question. What does intelligence really mean? My kids and I were just having a conversation about IQ and how I said I would not be using that particular number ever. Taylor, thanks for framing that. If I could just repeat it, it's the teacher's responsibility to teach and both of our responsibilities to learn. It's a really neat way to say that. All right, so let me just do a new share here. Here we go. I think coming back up. Super. Okay, so once we do some ideas about beliefs about teaching and learning, we get into some of the constructs that we do want students to both read or hear the theory about and then practice and work on throughout the module. And so mindfulness is one of them. It's one that we've recently added in with a collaborator at Trent University, Fergal O'Hagan, who does research around this. And so mindfulness, the practice that allows you to develop present time awareness of your thoughts and feelings. So I wonder if I might ask the question. And I see wonderful, a number of you have answered it. Where do we sit with this one? So in the mindfulness world, there are different perspectives, different schools of thought, if you will. But one of the very common ones is the idea that it's, it's the awareness that's especially important, and we not trying to qualify it as good or bad, but just that it is. And then in the module, we think about this as a way of connecting back in with metacognition. The more mindful we are and the more in the present we are, then the idea is that it can lead to a better ability to identify what we know, what we don't know, better idea about our strategies, what we're actually doing, how much those are working. So that's one of the ways that we connect these ideas here. It also gets tied into the idea of multitasking and how what that can do in terms of learning, and then what that can also mean in terms of stress. So I see something's come up in the chat. I'll look in just a quick second, just changing screens again. So if you're still seeing the form or questionnaire when you're re-entering the code, try refreshing the screen, and then you should have the ability to auto advance, either with an arrow on the slide screen itself if you're working on a desktop, or maybe even swiping if you're on something like a tablet. And I would say also don't worry too much about it. I'll just be sure to also share the statements with you so you can see what's coming up. So we also talk with students about mindset. So this is the idea that in a fixed mindset, students believe their basic abilities are just fixed traits. I'm good at math or I'm not good at math. I'm an artist or I'm not an artist. And in a growth mindset, students understand their talents and abilities can be developed. So you know what, I may not be good at this area of math right now, but if I work on it, I get help, I take time, etc., then I can improve and develop my abilities. So we have a number of statements that we ask students to answer related to this one, such as my ability in the subject is something I cannot change. When a problem gets really hard, I give up, as opposed to digging in and messing around with it. And Susan, maybe who's been working in in problem solving and might have something to say about the skills that we might gain by digging in, or what we might do when we get to a point where we want to give up in the problem. And I'm not and insert whatever subject you're thinking about there. I'm not a math person, an art person, a chemistry person, an engineering person, whatever it might be. Okay, and rather than switching screens here, I'll just say that most people right now, as they're answering, are leaning towards the disagree or strongly disagree. So it seems to be a group that's more into the growth mindset kind of world. Yeah, Camille, I would say, yeah, talent more or less equivalent to ability from this perspective. So some other notes about mindsets and the way we address it in the module. One around mindsets is that most people hold different mindsets in different areas of their life. So I might have a belief that I can develop my abilities in one area, but a belief that my abilities are fixed in another area. We see the research finds that it's challenging situations that tend to bring out not even just a student's mindset, but a person's mindset. We often see reported students face it in the transition from high school to university. They're facing a challenging situation, some for the first time if they've done really well in high school, and that can showcase their mindset if they decide they're just not good at something, or if they see that as an opportunity, rather reframe it and start to dig in instead. So a growth mindset is predictive of better academic outcomes. Mindset interventions have been effective, I would say, with variable effect sizes, but especially for at-risk groups. The caveat there, the other side, is that it's not just having a growth mindset that for an at-risk group will automatically change the situation. And of course, there are systemic barriers in the way that can still hinder or negate someone's learning or progress. Yeah, thanks, Will, for that. Persistence is key. Yeah. And so for better or worse, the instructor's mindset matters too. And this, when I say for better or worse, it's great if the instructor has a growth mindset and beliefs that their students' abilities can be changed, can improve. That's really positive for students in the course. But what one study found is that for instructors with a fixed mindset belief about their students' abilities, that also negatively impacted students in the course, particularly racialized students. Thanks, Will. Okay, thank you to Susan. Then persistence is key. I'm seeing in the chat now. Okay, so we talk about the importance of failure and the idea that success comes through effort and failure. We give a number of examples about people who have had failures over and over and over and over again. And funnily enough, one of the ones that the students seem to like the most is one about vacuum cleaners, which, I thought wouldn't be the most exciting topic, but I think it's really the way that this idea of success and failure is framed in the video that is particularly attractive to them. And again, the caveat here, and we've seen this, I think, through the pandemic, is that if there's, that one single assessment that makes or breaks your career, it can be really hard to say, don't worry, it'll be fine. Success comes through. You just got to keep trying. It's all going to be okay. Versus, say, sports teams or other opportunities we have in academic settings to try and then fail in lower stakes kind of environments before we get to the big game or to the big assessment, so to speak. So we also speak about changing your fixed mindset voice. So, okay, you realize you have a fixed mindset voice about something. How might you change it if you want to change it? And there's nothing really to say that you have to change it. It's perfectly fine to have a fixed, in my opinion anyway, to have a fixed mindset voice around something, as long as it's you deciding that you want that's okay with you, and that fits your goals and your values. So it's deciding how you interpret those challenges, setbacks, and criticisms. If you're telling yourself, well, what if you fail? You'll be a failure. Just talking back and saying, well, most successful people had failures along the way. if you don't try, well, you can protect yourself. You won't be wrong. You won't drop the ball. You can protect yourself. You can keep your dignity. And with the growth mindset voice, though, speaking back and saying, well, if I don't try, I automatically fail, or I automatically don't contribute, or I automatically don't learn. So where's the dignity in that? Acknowledging, of course, that it's hard to put yourself out there in those situations. Yeah, what a great point. Universities should provide safe practice fields, yeah, to allow learning from failures. That's wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Zil. If I can read yours out loud, those opportunities for practice and low stakes failure were really important, but become really valuable when high quality feedback is given. And yeah, and I think, Susan, you were speaking earlier about formative feedback that you're giving as you're teaching problem solving skills. And I think those would be really important to dig in on. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so then we really get back and give students practice in this metacognition bit, asking them what they know or don't know about the course's prior knowledge learning outcomes, a prerequisite knowledge, if you will. And then at whatever point they are in the course, whether it's 2 weeks in or before that first major assessment, what they know or don't know about the course's intended learning outcomes to that point. And then getting toward planning or deciding what you're going to do for your learning. So just to give some examples, so we would ask students at this point, so this is again an activity within the module, rating your knowledge or skills at the following scale from 1 to 10. And so it could be, things you should be able to do really quickly and easily so that they're not slowing you down for later things. It could be more about scientific argumentation, causal reasoning. It may be more around professional skills. So Emily and Grant and I were speaking earlier about leadership skill development. And so it could be around the leadership skills and how they think they're doing around different ways of acting as a leader, different types of leaders, as an example. Then we also ask students what the basis for their ratings are. And so whether it was just an intuition or feeling, whether they read something over and they felt like it was right, did they summarize, did they test themselves with familiar or unfamiliar problems, or did they work with someone in different ways to decide how they were doing? And one of the neat things is that not only do we see students' abilities shifting throughout the course, it's great, it's a course, it's meant for learning, but we also see a shifting in their ratings, in the basis for their ratings as the course progresses. And then they're prompted to take some next steps. So is it thinking about their study strategies? Is it going to seek help when we give a list of possible places where they might seek help and support for them? One of the things in this planning phase is around goals and priorities. We actually asked them to start really large and spend a few minutes just brainstorming about their values and priorities in life, like that really broad sense of values and priorities. What's important to you? Is it family? Is it career? Is it a close friend? Is it your dog? All the way down, narrowing down to setting some really specific goals for the course at hand. So for the course at hand, we use a SMART goal framework, thinking about specific, measurable, accountable, reachable, and time-specific goals. We've also had what I think is a great suggestion is to build in a layer of possible obstacles that might stand in the way so that you can plan around those obstacles for the goals. The planning your time video and then subsequent prompts is one of the most popular things that students report liking. So it's the idea of asking them to plan their semester, starting, again, thinking about their goals, their values and priorities. What are the required things, the things that are locked into their schedule? When do they do things that align with their values and priorities to make sure there's time for those things, whether it's physical fitness, wellness, time with family, friends, the family dog, all those different kinds of things. Yeah. Quizzes can be like scrimmages. Yeah, low, but still with some pressure. It's still like a real game. Yeah, great. Cool. And so then we're in the module, we're still early in the semester, and now it's time to act. And so we invite students to keep checking in for themselves, and we do this with them explicitly, but we invite them to think about how they're progressing towards their goals and the intended learning outcomes and what they're doing to achieve their goals. So just to recap, we've just wrapped up the first part of the module, and the parts before and after each assessment are similar in ways. So before each assessment, we ask them to rate their abilities and the course learning outcomes to date. Again, how did they decide? And then kind of the what next kind of prompts. After each assessment, we ask them to think about how it went, review your goals, any changes to make, any adjustments. What about any changes to supports, learning strategies, study strategies, and what are the next steps? One of the big differences that we ask around the final assessment that's different from after the other ones is that we ask them to articulate what they've learned in the module and to describe how they can use those skills in other contexts. So say in a future semester course or in their career. Wonderful. So just to give you a little bit of what the results look like. So I think we're actually at over 6,000 students now in about 10 different courses at a few different institutions that have used the module in the US and Canada. We see really high completion rates when there's at least a small mark incentive given. So that's like a 1-2% mark incentive, whether it's the bonus or the course mark. We get really good completion rates and very, very low completion rates that start at 30% and tank right to 0 if there's no mark incentive given. Really positive perceptions from students, where we have 82% believe the module will improve their learning, 79% who would recommend it to a friend. Yeah. And then we look at whether or not they can demonstrate the knowledge or skills that we're hoping they'll learn, the intended learning outcomes from the module itself. And so one is around metacognitive skill. And so what we do is with those learning outcome ratings that they give before going into the exam, so say they think they're going to the exam with an 80, for example, we've compared that with aligned learning outcomes from assessment on the exam. So to see if their predictions about their abilities are matching up with their actual abilities. And so to give you some not real data to start. So if they had really low metacognitive skill, you'd see that this all over the place, kind of like a giant, really scatter plot. So say as an example, somebody who went into the exam thinking they were going to get a 60 on it, came out with a 40, and they were surprised they got, had such a low mark and they thought they were going to pass the exam. And this doesn't have to be all mark-based, right? It could be around mastery of a concept instead, but this is just a simple numbers kind of way to picture what metacognitive skill could look like. And it's also not great if somebody was, predicting they were going in with a 40 and actually came out with almost an 80. You think, oh, that's kind of good. I did better than I thought. But the problem there is that from a strategy perspective, it means they could have been either spending their time differently on something else, more effectively. And so there's still a mismatch. So we'd still ideally want students to know what they know so that they can strategize accordingly. Yeah, what a neat idea, Susan. If you can find a different incentives than grades. We actually workshopped the module before offering it for real. We piloted some versions of it and we tried, what about pizza? What if we paid you? What about a mark in your co-curricular record? And none of those things worked. But I think to align with your suggestion there, I think that if it were something within the course itself, like an opportunity to retake a quiz, that could be really, really helpful. Yeah, Graham, I see your comment that looking at focusing on achieving skills, not grades. There's some really neat stuff being done around that. It'd be really fun to talk about. Super. So, okay, so just to finish this one out, if somebody really had high metacognitive skill, they went and think they were going to get an 80 or had mastered a certain number of skills and were able to demonstrate those on an exam, on another kind of assessment. So what we're actually seeing is that students' metacognitive skills start out pretty low early in the one course that we looked at, but do get better throughout the semester. So that's reassuring, if not ideal. Actually, let me back up just for a second before I get to the how much work is this going to be slide. So we've looked at mindfulness, and so mindfulness has shifted also towards, sorry, not mindfulness, mindsets. So the students do shift more in a number of different courses towards growth mindsets, which may or may not be good. I mean, if it's not a subject they want to learn in, I'm pretty okay with them sticking with whatever mindset they have, but we do see a shift towards a growth mindset. We also see them reporting improvements in other skills, and we're looking to both look at their perceptions of learning and also measure the demonstrations of learning as well. A common question that comes up when people are thinking about using the module is how much work is involved. So 1 to 4 hours, and it's essentially copying the existing module and adapting the learning outcomes for sure, unless you want some chemistry, organic chemistry to learning outcomes. And then any other parts of the module that you would like to, anything is modifiable. We do provide instructions and support. In fact, we have a student right now who can take someone's syllabus and do the first iteration of the module for people, if that's desired. The results do export to a spreadsheet that can be then uploaded, say, into the learning management system, and it's very easy just to reuse in future years, with no other work to be done. So I'm going to stop there so that I can turn to the things in the great conversation that's happening in the chat that I keep peeking over at. I do want to thank our development and evaluation teams. So we ran 2 teams in parallel, one to develop the module and another to run essentially a program evaluation concurrently with that. And so we try to get all the different kinds of stakeholders involved in both the different kinds of teams. So students, professors, instructional designers, administrators, people from different sectors, different disciplines, all collaborating on this. And so it's an open education resource. We've collaborated with our Teaching and Learning Support Service, our Student Academic Success Service. We have collaborators at Trent University and growing more elsewhere. We've also collaborated with our Center for Research and Educational and Community Services on this. So with that, I will officially pause, and maybe we can turn into, I don't know, Greg, if you maybe want to highlight some of the things that you've especially seen in the chat at this point. Would that work?
What I was going to suggest is I'm going to try to open it up. I'll go through the chat and pull out some comments, but while we're doing that, I'm going to encourage people to use their microphone to get even more of a discussion going. So if people have a pressing question, because there's lots of great comments in the chat, but not so many questions, or if you'd like Professor Flynn to expand on a given topic that she looked at, fire away on the microphone or in the chat if you want. But in the meantime, I'll try to pull out some of the comments that are being made.
Sure. Thank you.
Alison, I'll jump in.
Please.
It's Emily. I'm just wondering, you talked about how it's been used at a lot of different universities. Has it been used across all disciplines and like arts and science, or sorry, arts as well as sciences, or has it been more picked up by science?
Yeah, great question. So initially it was all science, and I think that was really, you know, my bias and the people I knew at the time when we first started it those years ago. So it's been used from first year undergraduate all the way through to graduate courses now. 2 graduate courses have used it at this point, mostly science and engineering. So we've had chemistry, biology, biopharmaceutical sciences, biochem, mechanical engineering has been the main one. And then an education course and a couple of psychology courses. So no business yet, no law, but yeah.
But it's coming. Great.
Hopefully.
It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, one psychology course took it and both did the module and then did like an analysis on top of it, which was pretty neat, very meta.
I see a suggestion from Alison that we stop sharing the slides, and that'll make them more interactive.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you for that.
Are there other questions? I see lots coming in here. So Patrick, do you want to ask your question or should I just read it?
Yeah, I can ask my question. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes. The question is, how do you operationalize the growth mindset to kind of actually measure it?
Are you asking how we measure whether students are shifting toward a growth mindset?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So we do it through through activities that students do at different time points in the module, where they report their mindsets towards the subject. And so, for example, the Menti question that you had done, my ability in this subject is something I cannot change, and those other statements. So there's actually a series of those statements. And we can tailor, instead of having subject, we can use the course subject instead there. And so we can look at what they're reporting early in the course and then what they report at other time points in the course.
Right. So it's kind of like the student's perception of their confidence or comfort with the material, for example.
Yeah, we would do both. So we ask them for their ratings of their abilities on their materials. So that one would be the closest to confidence around the material, and then also their mindset, because they could have really high confidence beliefs about their abilities. Like I'm really good at this, but I don't think my ability can change, and or completely vice versa. Like I'm terrible at this right now, but I'm going to figure it out. So we do see a lot of differences and a lot of, when we have conversations about this in class, and students like really love seeing the aggregate results and being able to have conversations like this, there's all sorts of perceptions about learning that come out of these conversations, even if it's just like a 5 or 10 minutes, even if it's just a few minutes before class, even. But lots of really great discussions that are really good to be able to address. That their ability is not fixed in this, that we're teaching the subject because we believe that you can learn in this area. So.
Arthur, you've got a question, and then Nick, and then I'll go back to the chat because I see some other questions coming up there.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. My question is in terms of tracking outcomes beyond the course, like after they graduate, like how they're doing in their careers. And I see that Lydia has a similar question. I don't know if Lydia wants to ask it.
That's right. I had a similar question just about how students are sort of retaining their learning through these metacognitive modules and potentially applying them in courses beyond the course for which they're taking it.
Thank you for that. So we've started looking at that, and we've done a pilot in one course where we had a course of about 150, of which 45 people had previously taken the module, and so now they were in a course where it wasn't being taken anymore. And so we asked them what aspects of the module they still were using or plan to use, and we were actually blown away by the results. So the students who had taken the module, over 90% of the students were still using some of the module's concepts. So those are reported information. We're actually looking now at that idea of transfer to other contexts, both in a really closely very similar subject, more different subjects, shorter time period, longer time period, both in terms of perceptions of transfer, like do I believe that I'm using these ideas? How often am I actually using these ideas, and the demonstrated use of the ideas.
Great. Nick, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, sure. Thank you. I'm not sure if the question is related to metacognition, but I wanted to ask this. In most of the quizzes and exam questions, the students are facing a clearly articulated question, and the result is normally a single numerical answer or something like that. So my question is, how to make students feel comfortable with open-end questions and embrace uncertainty, and sometimes how, outside the class, you'll have to articulate the problem and define a problem yourself as an engineer, and make them feel more comfortable with this.
Right, absolutely. And this is such an important question and an idea, because even as scientists and engineers, like we're often trained that there's a single answer, and then we get to the lab in a research environment where it's not as obvious, and then go from evidence to policy, where there's the science behind an issue, as we're seeing now, for example, is but one of many factors governing policy decisions, whether we agree with them or not. And so I think it comes, my simplistic answer, I guess, is that it comes from how we explain the ideas to students, the opportunities we give them for practice with messy problems, with multiple answers, with ambiguity, with gray zones, how that we assess in a way that's aligned with that, and that our expectations for those assessments are also really transparent. And so it's the idea, making really clear and explicit that there are multiple possible answers, that the what quality looks like in this case is not the final number, the final answer, but rather how it's developed or how it's justified or how many different ideas were leveraged in the decision, or whatever the qualities are that you're looking for in the answer. But I guess it's aligning those pieces. And I'm sure for those who there's lots of people in the room who would have other things to contribute to that. So if you want to jump in, folks, with your opinions, I'd love to see them.
Thank you.
Well, actually, I'm going to suggest take one last question from Kiki while you're getting your microphone on, and then we'll close off the session. But there's many great points on the chat, so I'm going to invite everyone to come to the After Hours Club. So we'll have a follow-up discussion exactly the same place, and we'll be able to really dive a bit deeper into some of these points. So I encourage everyone who wants to stay on for discussion. We can do that, but we do want to close this session at time. So Kiki, do you have, you want to say your question, or do you want me to read it?
I can go, thank you. And thank you, Professor Flynn, for the great talk. Really interesting. I was wondering, how does imposter syndrome and the reverse of that play into students' ability to predict their exam scores?
So one of the things we do observe in the metacognition things that we're looking at is a well-known effect in psychology called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And so initially, we see that the students who perform less well academically are overestimating their abilities, and the students who are actually higher achieving on the exam are underestimating their abilities. And so that's a really classic effect that comes out. What we see, though, is that over the course of the semester, that students all become more accurate. In fact, the higher achieving students become extremely accurate. The very lowest achieving students, and I'm talking like the under 25% achievers, are still not accurate in estimating their abilities. But the other group is, and so that was really exciting to see. Now, what we didn't do, and this maybe relates to one Kimia's question in a way, but we didn't give any incentive for an accurate prediction of their ability. So, what could that look like? So say, you're answering a question, what do you think your score is going to be in the question, or to what extent do you think you've demonstrated this given skill? And we're going to give you a bonus mark if your perception of your ability, your rating of your ability matches your actual ability. Get a bonus mark, or whatever kind of, other kinds of incentives. So that would be a really interesting thing, I think, to look at as well.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I want to very much thank Professor Flynn for joining us today and giving a fascinating talk. The hour just flew by. I want to thank everybody who engaged on the Mentimeter, engaged on the chat, and made this such an interactive discussion. And I very much hope that people are walking away, but I do encourage you to follow up, think about what you learned here, and figure out how you apply it to your teaching and learning. With that, I'll ask you to join me and give a big virtual hands of applause. Doesn't quite sound the same when it's in space. Thank you very much.